Greetings, loyal subscribers and honoured guests. We've arrived at the penultimate episode of Cover Tape Chaos Zapped, which once again is a double tape filled with gaming goodness. In the issue of the magazine that went alongside these tapes, the team did a review roundup of every single racing game that was released for the C64 up to that point. And this is one of my favourite genres, so I'm definitely going to have to go back and read that article in full when I have a bit more time to do so. Pre-3D racing games don't always age well, but the top-down style ones like Iron Man's Off-Road Racing hold up quite nicely. Anyway though, that's enough waffle, let's get on with the episode. Taking pride of place at the top of side A on tape 1 is Stormlord. This game became quite infamous because it included giant topless fairies, and I believe later console ports were actually censored so that the pixelated tiddies couldn't corrupt any children that happened to play it. It's all quite tame though, really. This is a puzzle platformer with very European design sensibilities in that the stages are riddled full of traps, such as floors that suddenly disappear and dump you onto enemies, and I really hate this type of game design. It's extremely reliant on trial and error, and your ability to remember what killed you previously so you can avoid it on future attempts. The puzzles are all object based, such as when a swarm of bees is preventing you from collecting a key, you first need to find a beehive and put it close by so that the swarm will fly over to that instead. Stormlord does feature some fantastic music, assuming you stay alive long enough to actually hear it. The Zap review crew were all fairly positive about the game, without getting too excited about it. Stu said, "It's been a while since such a well-presented arcade adventure has appeared." Whereas Robin pointed out that mistakes are mercilessly punished, a toughie this one. They gave the game a score of 80% overall and wrapped things up with a typical Hewson release, superb presentation and very playable. While there are most definitely many worse games on the C64, I personally found it an exercise in frustration, and the only way I could enjoy myself would be to turn Infinite Lives on. Next we have Galaxian, and while there was an official version of Galaxian made for the C64 by AtariSoft in 1983, this is not that. It is instead a public domain version, and it's okay. It's fairly faithful to the Namco original, but by 1992 standards it's not particularly exciting. It's essentially the Space Invaders formula with a bit of extra colour, and enemies which break formation to swoop down at you. Bettered by its own sequel, Galaga, in the arcades, and these days you would be better off getting yourself a copy of Galencia for the C64 instead. Side B of Tape 1 begins with Ranarama, which is actually my standout title for this issue. This is a randomly generated dungeon crawler where you can take control of a frog who has to descend down layer by layer and eliminate deadly wizards one by one. The action is displayed from a top-down perspective, and each room is revealed when you go through a door, with no two playthroughs being the same. You will find swarms of enemies that you need to shoot and avoid, enemy generators to destroy, energy crystals that you need to collect so you don't die, plus spells and rune tiles on the floor. These tiles do various things, such as showing you a map of the dungeon, destroying every enemy in a room, or letting you see which spells you have equipped. As you explore, you can choose to level up different aspects of your character, such as offense or defense, yet you need to keep these fairly balanced or you will consume power too quickly and die, so it doesn't pay to try and min-max your stats. When you do finally encounter an enemy wizard, you battle them by completing a minigame in which you have to shift letters around so they spell out Ranarama. I love random dungeon crawlers like Sword of Fargol, Temple of Apshai, or the Diablo series on modern platforms, so Ranarama really appealed to me. The game does suffer a bit from being a Spectrum port which retains the monochrome visuals of the original version, but the gameplay makes up for that. Julian agreed with me, saying, Ranarama is graphically and sonically weak, but it is beautifully designed, rewarding and incredibly playable. Steve, on the other hand, thought the game was too similar to the likes of Gauntlet, saying, "Ranarama is too derivative to be ultimately worthwhile." In the end, they settled on an overall score of 87%, summing it up with a well-structured and playable Paradroid variant. The final game on Tape 1 is Terminal City, and when I read it was developed by Ash and Dave, who made one of my favourite C64 games of all time with their port of Dragon Breed, I was quite excited. Terminal City starts with a really neat and fun little intro sequence before getting into the game proper. Once the title screen music started playing and I began playing the game itself, I thought I had played this game before. It turns out the music is ripped from the game Parallax by Sensible Software and Ocean, hence the feeling of deja vu I was getting. The goal is to activate every single terminal on the map, and in order to do so you first need to gun down enemies and earn credits to buy an activation disc. Then you need to take the disc to the correct terminal so that you activate them in order. You have two modes of travel at your disposal: on foot where you can shoot, and by hoverboard where you can't die but you can't shoot enemies or earn credits from killing them. So the best strategy is to regularly use the hoverboard to zip around the map until you locate the next terminal, then gun down enemies until you can afford the 10 credits to buy a disc. The gameplay is okay, but it's nothing all that exciting really. The whole thing gets rather samey before too long. You do get a very generous supply of lives. At first I thought perhaps they were infinite, but it turns out that you're just given a lot. This is fun to spend a little bit of time on, but not one I see myself coming back to really. Over on side A of the second tape, we start with another PD clone of an established arcade classic. No prizes for guessing which game Quicks is ripping off. This is a pretty faithful but rather dully presented version of Tato's arcade game, especially as the more interesting sequel called Volfied was already available. You take control of a little cursor type thing on the outside edge of the screen. By pressing the fire button you can move off from the edge and draw a line. Should you manage to draw a shape and connect it to another part of the screen without being hit by a spark or the kicks itself, then you will fill in that part and earn some points. The goal is to fill in a minimum of 75% of the screen, which completes the level and the whole thing starts over, except slightly more challenging. I like the odd game of kicks and this does play pretty well, but it is lacking in frills. This is joined by a platform adventure called Tusari, where you control what appears to be an Amazonian lady. The graphics are rather messy, and the game itself feels a bit unfinished with some quite odd hit detection. After running around for a while I did encounter a boss which was quite impressively large, but he didn't prove too difficult to kill if you stay out of reach of his attacks and shoot him in the head. From what I was able to ascertain, this game was never commercially available and only ever appeared on this cover tape, which makes it an interesting curio but not really a great game unfortunately. Side B of Tape 2 features yet another text adventure, and I still can't get on with these no matter how hard I try. This one is called Atalan and starts with your playable character being shipwrecked on a beach surrounded by tall cliffs with no apparent way to climb out. I'm assuming someone must have really enjoyed playing these back in the day, or we wouldn't have been given so many on these tapes. Either that or they were easy and cheap to acquire. Finally, we have Cops, which is one of the earliest suit games that I remember Alf Ingve making. He has made many more since then though. It's not a bad effort at all really for 1992, but it does feature all the usual shortcomings of the Souk engines, such as fixed enemy patterns and quite a bit of slowdown and flicker. So then, there was once again quite a bit of filler on these tapes, so I do have to wonder whether going to 2 tapes instead of 1 was actually the best idea. Of everything featured here, Ranarama is the only game that I will continue to play after I'm done. Thanks for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, then please consider leaving a like, dropping a comment, subscribing to the channel or sharing on social media. Make sure you report back here in 2 weeks' time for the grand finale of the Zap Mega Tapes. In the meantime, take care.